All right. Is everybody okay? So we have a few people here. What we're going to do, what I'm going to show you right now is from, well, first of all, let me ask anybody, is everybody okay with where we are? Do we understand what we're doing? We're getting down to the home stretch, right? And some of the things that I'm showing you now are actually to reinforce some of the things we learned earlier on. I was actually up till late last night trying to figure out what I should put in to these final modules. And one of the most important modules I wanted you to know now is and pertains to why go first. I've sort of advocated that. I've said it before in different ways. Influence everybody else, right? Mirror and match. Go first. And why would you go first? Why would there be an advantage of going first? Well, for a while I had certain tapes that I had in my office that I could never get access to, and I finally found it online. One of the videos that I always show early in the semester, usually, but it's always good to learn. And sometimes I even show this tape twice in a semester. And the reason why I show this tape that you're about to see is because, as I said, it's Robert Cialdini, and Robert Cialdini is considered the best social psychologist in the world. And he's going to be able to tell you why go first, the power of you, meaning you can influence people, and you can change your destiny for the future. So does anyone have any questions before we get to see that video? We okay? All right.
Professor, I have a quick question.
Yes, Edward.
Have you heard of Matthew Lieberman?
No, I haven't. Who is he?
He's also a very famous social psychologist. He's from, I think, of UCLA, and he talks also about similar beliefs. I'll email you a few.
Yeah, please send it to me, because I always like to use different people, and I believe in a philosophy called CANI, constant and never-ending improvement. So I'm never satisfied with where I am. I'm always looking to actually get better.
For sure. Awesome.
Right. Does that make sense?
I'm looking forward to Friday. You know that.
Thank you. So I'm going to pop some more students coming in. So let me pop them in first, so they don't feel like, what the heck's going on? I'm only 2 seconds late, and all of a sudden they're in the middle of everything.
Professor, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Did you hear any of that? I said, I'm going to start letting people in. I don't even know why I was muted all of a sudden. I didn't push mute. That's interesting. Thank you. I said, I wanted to make sure that everybody gets a chance to see this video if they can. And maybe won't see the whole thing. If I do, I'll truncate it and put it online again, so you guys can see it individually. But I wanted to, hopefully you'll be able to see it, and let's see what goes from there. Takes a second for this video. There you go. Let's see if you hear it. And a second, let it do its due. This is not doing what I wanted to do yet. Come on now. Why would you freeze on me? There we go. Why is it doing that? Never does that. So they know I've hyped this video. Can you hear it?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna mute myself.
Welcome to Stanford University. I'm Catherine O'Brien. Can your organization benefit from effective, ethical, and enduring partnerships? Today we'll hear how social influence makes that possible. Dr. Robert Cialdini, arguably the most cited social psychologist in the world today, outlines 6 principles for bringing about desirable change. Let's listen as he tells how the non-manipulative use of those principles makes the people in your organization feel personally committed to the change.
Well, thank you. I'm very glad to be here today. Let me just bring up the screen here. As Janice suggested, I want to talk about the psychology of persuasion today. And as you could probably tell from that introduction, I am primarily an academic. What you might not have been able to tell is that I will always be primarily an academic. One reason is I have tenure, and they can't kick me out. The other is that I love it. My job, after all, involves the investigation and communication, exploration of ideas. I can't think of a job description I would rather go to in the morning than that one. At the same time, I do recognize that wholly academic concerns aren't always held in the highest regard outside of the university community. I was at a business conference a while ago where I heard an academic described as someone who's not satisfied by something that's working well in practice until he's tried it out in theory. And then this speaker went on to describe a theorist as someone who's willing to assume anything except responsibility. And I think there's a regrettable amount of truth there, so I'm going to try to be different today. First of all, I'm going to do more than talk about the theory of persuasion, the theory of influence. I want to talk about the practice of influence. How it can be that one person can significantly increase the likelihood that another person will say yes to the same thing. The merits of the case identical in the way that the case is presented. Look, we know that in the modern world we have competitors who have good cases to make. We have good cases to make. The group that's going to get the lion's share of the business are those who can make their good case well. And that's what we'll talk about today. I'm going to leave it to you to have a good case to make, but we're going to learn about how to make that good case optimally so that people will move in the direction of the benefits that you can provide for them. The second thing I'm going to do, besides talking about the practice of influence, is that I'm going to take responsibility for what I have to say. I'll issue a guarantee right now that if you understand and employ the principles of influence that we talk about this morning, you will become significantly more effective agents of influence in your professional environments. Right? Now, these principles that we'll talk about are so fundamental, so universal, that they don't simply apply to your professional environments, although that's where we'll be spending most of our time discussing. They also apply to other contexts in which you find yourself and you want to be influential. They will allow you to be more effective in getting people to say yes to you if they are your friends, if they are your neighbors, if they are your family members. I'll even guarantee that if you understand and use these principles, you will get the most resistant of all audiences to be willing to say yes to you, your children. I'll guarantee you'll get your kids to say yes to you more often, okay? So after crawling out on that limb, let's see if I can come through on that particular being specific. First of all, I want to be specific about a particular kind of influence, a particular kind of persuasion that I want to consider. It's compliance. The idea that we're not just interested in changing attitudes or perceptions or opinions. We want to change behavior, getting people to say yes. It's the science of getting what you ask for. And I don't use this term science lightly. As Janet suggested, the persuasion is not the only route to success. There is a science to persuasion. There is a systematic study, vast body of research, 50 years now, of scientific investigation into what causes people to say yes to requests when they receive them. We'll review what I think are the most important conclusions from that research. So we'll be talking about compliance, getting people to say yes, to do what you want, rather than just to think about it in a positive way. Another way I'm going to be specific is that when I do this program in a smaller group, let's say a half-day or a full-day workshop, I go around the room and I ask people what they want to get from the time that we have together. And invariably, at least one person says, well, I'll tell you what, Dr. Cialdini, I think the science of influence and the topic of persuasion are inherently interesting. They're engaging issues involved, I'm sure. But I'll tell you what I really want from this day. I want one thing that I can take back to my office and implement tomorrow morning and be more successful as a result. Give me one thing out of this day and I'll count it a success. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you more than one thing right now. I'm going to give you 6 things right now that you will be able to implement immediately upon going back to your office, because they have to do with things that you confront on a daily basis. I will answer the following 6 questions for you during our time together. Here's the first. If you have 2 options to present to a client, which should you present first? The more costly or the less costly one? Here's a second question. Is it better to tell prospects what they stand to gain by moving in your direction, or what they stand to lose if they don't? Third, if you have a new piece of information, when should you mention that it's new? Before or after you present this information to your audience? Fourth, if you have a product, service, or idea that has both strengths and weaknesses, and what doesn't? When should you present the weaknesses? Early or late in your presentation? Clear answer to this one. Fifth, after someone has praised you, your product, or your organization, what is the most effective thing you can do immediately after you have said thank you? I'm here on campus to write a new book. The book is going to be called Moments of Power. And it has to do with the fact that in the course of social interaction, there are particular windows of opportunity where if you know how to identify that moment and what to fill that moment with, you will become significantly more effective. There is a moment of power immediately after someone has said thank you. What do you put in that moment? I'll tell you when we get to that section. Finally, to arrange for someone to like you and want to cooperate with you, what is the single most productive thing you can do before you try to influence that person to like you and cooperate with you? We'll answer all of those questions. Okay. Let's go back to the first one that we considered. If you have 2 options to present to a client, which should you present first, the more costly or the less costly one? And I'd like to answer that question, solve that particular puzzle, by solving a different one. It has to do with a mystery. At least it was a mystery to me when several years ago I encountered a newspaper article about a gift of humanitarian aid, several $1,000s of humanitarian aid that had been sent between the countries of Mexico on the one hand and Ethiopia on the other. Now, at the time, Ethiopia could lay claim to the greatest suffering, privation, and misery in the world because of drought, because of internal wars, because of crop failure. The people of Ethiopia were dying by the hundreds every day. And so their relief agencies were calling out to the rest of the world for medicine, for money, for resources of one sort or another. It didn't surprise me then that several $1,000s would be sent between Mexico and Ethiopia. When I read further into the article, however, I was shocked to learn that the money had not gone from Mexico to Ethiopia. It had gone from Ethiopia to Mexico to help the victims of the Mexico City earthquake that year. Now, how do we explain that puzzling pattern of human behavior? The way I'm going to do it is in terms of the first principle of influence, the universal principle of influence, all right, that my research has uncovered. I've claimed that there are 6 laws, basic rules of human behavior that we can use to categorize and understand the motives that get people to say yes to requests. And here's the first one: reciprocation. In all human cultures, there is not a single society that does not train its members in the rule for reciprocation, which says, I am obligated to give back to you the form of behavior that you first give to me. If you invite me to a party, I should invite you to one of mine. If you remember my birthday with a gift, I should remember yours. If you do me a favor, I owe you a favor. And I'll say very simply, in the context of obligation, people say yes to those they owe. You can find evidence of this all around. I like to talk about a particular study in my classes that was done by a sociologist at Brigham Young University a few years ago. One holiday season, he decided to send holiday greeting cards to a of perfect strangers around the country. He just went to phone books in different cities. He closed his eyes, he picked a name, and he sent these people a Christmas card. He was expecting some kind of response. He was not prepared for the flood of cards that came back to him from people who didn't know him from Adam. That's how it works on all of us. We feel an obligation to give back to others what they have given to us. As I say, I talk about this in my classes. I had a student a couple of years ago come up after class. This is a little different student than most. She's a woman who had raised a family in Scottsdale, Arizona, where I live. She came back to get her degree, and she said, Dr. Cialdini, you have just solved a decade-long mystery in my home. She said, about 10 years ago, we got a Christmas card from some people in Santa Barbara, California, the Harrisons, and I didn't remember the Harrisons in him. I asked my husband, he couldn't place the Harrisons, and my kids were too young, and she said, with a great amount of effort, I resisted sending them a card that year because I was sure it was a mistake. But the following year, we got another card from the Harrisons. So I sent them a card. We're now in the 10th year of exchange. Still don't know who they are. How it works. Now, here's why it works. It works the way it does because every human society that trains its members, every group, every organization that plays by the rules of reciprocal exchange gains an enormous competitive advantage. It is that within that group, whoever needs help, resources, time, attention, staffing, whatever it is, can call on other members of the group who feel free to send those resources because they are not sending them away. Now that's profound. For the first time in evolutionary history, there is no other species that has anything like the idea of future obligation for repayment of gifts and favors and services. For the first time in evolutionary history, it becomes possible for one individual to give resources to another without giving them away. What you get instead is a credit. And now when you need something, you can call on other members of the group whom you have helped in the past, and they are very willing. In fact, they are waiting to help because the saddle of obligation weighs heavy on us, and we want to repay our debts. We want to give back to those who have given to us. It's a manager's dream, this rule. whoever is needy within the organization, whoever has a deficit, can get resources from others, right? And can feel good about asking for them because they're not being solicitors of information or resources that don't get paid back. They now will pay back. Whoever needs it, that resource is sent, that deficit is resolved within the group. Right? Terrific system. Now, let me finish the story of the woman who came to my office and told me about the Christmas card story. She came back to my office a few months later, and she said, Dr. Cialdini, I have to tell you the end of this story. She said, my son, Skip, was applying to colleges this year. He's a very good student, so he got into all of his schools, including his top choice, the University of California at Santa Barbara. She said he's such a good student that he was asked to be in their honors program and to come to campus a day early for the honors convocation. Well, his dorm room wasn't ready, so he needed a place to stay in Santa Barbara. And she said, I thought to myself, who do we know in Santa Barbara? The Harrisons! The Harrisons! So she called him on the phone, and she was the sort of person who didn't just write a Christmas card with a greeting. She would also include a Xerox letter describing what the family had been up to for the... So the Harrisons knew about Skip since Little League days. They said, Skip, the Skip Man, the Skip Meister, of course he can come and stay with us. That's now. Here's the other side of that. Should the Harrisons ever have a son or a daughter traveling across the country who needs a place to stay in Arizona, well, my student and her family have to be willing to live by the rule and give back, but why not? Now they have what the Harrisons need. It's a terrific system. We should not bungle this system away when it's right in our... We should master the art of exchange. Exchange is the initiator that begins relationships that create partnerships, alliances, and allegiances. And it means you should be first. The implication of this is if you want to set the tone for the relationship that you want to engender and cultivate, you act first. Your question when you go into a room where you want to be influential is not who can help me here? It should be whom can I help here? Whom can I genuinely advantage, especially in a business? How can I support this?
Wait for me.
Now,
Keep up.
want to promote.
Come on, King.
Now, we have to be careful not to fumble this
Oh,
one
gosh.
away. It's easy to do. Let me give you an example. Suppose you go back to your offices after this event and there's a phone call for you from somebody within your organization, maybe somebody outside of your organization, who you would like to be able to influence in the future. This person needs a favor from you. Let's say she's doing a presentation tomorrow and was working on it and realizes she has a gap in her knowledge. But she thinks that in your files, you have the data that will fill this gap. And she asks you, would you go to your files, get that information out, collate it, get it into a table for me, and get it to me by the end of the day so I can get it into my PowerPoint presentation? Right? Well, you've just come back from this meeting. There are emails, there are other phone messages, there are notes taped to your door, but you say, okay, I'll do it. And you spend 3 hours getting this information. You even drive across town, you get it to this person on time, and the following day, she calls you up to say, thank you, I really appreciate that. And how many times have you heard yourself say in response, don't think anything of it. No big deal. It's okay, just part of the job. I would have done it for anybody. Sound familiar? Well, you have just fumbled away one of the most powerful principles of influence we have. And you don't want to do that. The whole system works better when people who give also receive in return. Otherwise, they're not willing to give in the first place. You have to be willing to accept what in return for what you have given. So what do you say when that person says, thanks, I really appreciate that. That was above and beyond the call of duty. Well, what you don't say is, yeah, and you owe me one now, Buster. No, no, no. That's going to produce resistance and resentment. Here's what I'm going to recommend that you say instead. Oh, sure, listen. I know that if the situation were ever reversed, you'd do the same for me. You'd do the same for me. See what you've done with that one statement? You haven't dismissed the genuine, you have put people on record. Yes, there was a genuine favor that was done. You haven't overblown it. You've simply labeled it as such. And I will guarantee now, the next time you need a favor, you can ask this person, and the answer will be significantly more likely yes than no. And you know what else? You can wait a long time before you call in your favor. How do I know that you can wait a long time? I know it by solving the mystery of the Ethiopian aid. When I saw that newspaper report, I was puzzled. I went to my university library to see if there was another journalist who had written about the gift of aid from Ethiopia to Mexico. There was a journalist who went to the head of the Ethiopian Relief Agency who had commissioned the funds and asked the question that I would have asked. Why did you do this? Your people are dying by the hundreds every day. You're calling out to the rest of the world for resources, and you just took thousands of dollars of your own people's resources and sent them to Mexico. Why did you do this? Well, you have to remember that Ethiopia has a very long-standing and sophisticated culture. And this man is reported to have straightened his backbone and said, because in 1935, when Italy invaded Ethiopia, Mexico helped us. Now, 50 years later, transcending the greatest privation and misery in the world, the rule for reciprocity triumphs. This is not to be bungled away when it is right there in our environments, waiting to be employed. Okay, now, one more thing about this rule. It doesn't just apply to gifts and favors and services. It also applies to concessions that people make to one another in negotiations. If you and I start out with two incompatible positions on some issue, you want this, I want that, and you were to say to me, I'll tell you what, Bob, I'll move from my extreme position over here to a more moderate one. If you make a concession to me, if I'm going to live up to the rule that says I have to give back to you what you've given to me, I have to make a concession in return. I have to meet you halfway. I know that that would work on me. It did work on me. A few years ago, I was walking in front of my university library. I was approached by a young man who was a Boy Scout selling tickets to the Boy Scout circus to be held that Saturday at the local Coliseum. $5 a piece for his tickets. I declined. But before I could walk away, he said, oh, well, if you can't do that, would you be willing to buy a couple of our chocolate bars here? They're only $1 a piece. And I bought 2 of his chocolate bars and immediately recognized that something important had happened because I don't like chocolate. But I like dollars. And he had arranged for me to give the dollars I liked for the chocolate I didn't. I went back to my office. I called a meeting of my research assistants to try to figure out what had happened. And where they devoured the evidence, I want you to know. And we thought that this rule for reciprocation of concessions was at work. He started out with an extreme request, $5 a piece. I said no. He said, oh, well, if you can't do that, how about just $1 a piece for what I have to offer? And I said yes. And we thought, well, maybe this would work on other people besides me. If you're interested in getting people to say yes to a favor, you start out with a larger one that they're likely to turn down, and then retreat to the favor you were interested in all along. Is that going to be more effective than just asking for that moderate-sized favor straight away? Well, to test this, we went out onto city streets in the Phoenix, Arizona area, asking passersby for a large favor. We said we were from the County Juvenile Detention Center, and we were asking for volunteers to take a group of juvenile delinquents from the center on a day trip to the zoo. Would you chaperone a group of juvenile delinquents on a day trip to the zoo? The great majority of people, under those circumstances, declined. Only 17% were willing to do it. But for another group, we began with even a larger favor. Would you be a big brother or big sister to one of the kids down at the center? This would require 3 hours of your time every week for the next 2 years. They blinked, 2 years? I don't even know where I'll be in 2 years. Then, taking our cue from the Boy Scout, we said, oh, well, if you can't do that, would you be willing to chaperone a group of juvenile delinquents on a day trip to the zoo? Under those circumstances, now 50% said, where do I sign? It's the same request. We haven't changed the request. The merits is, it's the zoo trip. What we changed was what went first. One more breath, a few more words, and we tripled willingness of people to say yes to a request. Now, notice something about the ethics of this. There was no Big Brother or Big Sister program down at the center. We invented that for reasons of scientific curiosity. We were studying this fact. But we don't want to be in that position of dishonestly using the reciprocation principle. But we can use it honestly. How many times is it the case that you have different levels of requests to make to people? You can make a request at this level or at this level. And often we censure ourselves. And they say, oh, well, they'll never go for this. And so we ask for the more moderate request. Right? What our data are suggesting is if there are genuinely beneficial requests that you can make at different levels, always start with the larger request. If your argument has been compelling, and they say yes to that larger one, there is frosting on your cake. Give people a chance to say yes to you. But if the answer is no, now you can retreat to the more moderate request and significantly increase the likelihood that they will say yes to you. Remember I said there was a moment of power after people say thank you to you? There is another moment of power after they say no to you. It's a moment we hate, and as it's human for us to retreat from that situation because it's self-damaging when people say no to us. Typically, we leave, we reconsolidate our energies, we think about another thing to say, and maybe we come back a week later with a concession. I'll tell you that you have missed the moment. There's evidence to show if you come back a week later, it's perceived as you're there making another request. Whereas if you make that concession in the same moment, it's perceived as a concession. And in the context of concession, people want to reply positively with a concession of their own. So here's a little heuristic. If someone has said no to you, if you retreat from the situation, you lose. If you retreat in the situation, you win. Okay, now, let's go on to the next principle that I want to talk about. It's the principle of scarcity. Another universal principle of influence. People want more of what they can't have, right? What they can have less of. Here's my favorite example. I like it because it's a mistake that was made by one of the most effective and successful marketing organizations of all time, the Coca-Cola Company. Do you remember what happened back in the late 80s when the Coca-Cola Company took something away from us that we had normally been used to, the taste of the classic Coke, the old Coke formula, and they supplanted it with the new Coke, right? And they thought this was going to be a great success, right? Because in blind taste tests, the majority of people like the new Coke more than the old Coke. But let me read you what Time magazine, which calls this the marketing debacle of the decade and one of the worst 100 ideas of the century, says happened. When Coca-Cola announced that it was changing the taste of the world's most popular soda, it failed to foresee the sheer frustration and fury that the news would create. From Bangor to Burbank, from Detroit to Dallas, tens of thousands of Coke lovers rose up as one to revile the suddenly sweeter taste of this new beverage and to demand their old Coke back. My favorite example of this is personified in a man named Gay Mullins, a retired real estate investor in Seattle, who became a national celebrity by issuing anti-New Coke buttons and t-shirts, setting up a hotline for disgruntled and depressed callers, threatening to bring a class action suit against the company to make the old cola recipe public. He organized the Old Cola Drinkers of America, whose aim was to bring back the beloved soft drink at any cost, and it did not matter to Mr. Mullins that in 2 blind tests, he expressed a preference for the new Coke over the old. It didn't matter because it wasn't the merits of the thing. It was the context in which the thing was placed. In the context of scarcity, people want what they can't have. What are the implications for you in this regard? It means that when you present an idea, a product, a service, a recommendation, you need to explain to people what it is about this that will give them something that they can't get anywhere else. Now, sometimes it's not one single thing. Sometimes it's a bundle of advantages that they will not be able to get unless they move in your direction. And let me tell you one other thing about this. When you describe these benefits, it is not sufficient to describe what they will gain from them, because the psychological research is very clear. People are more motivated by the idea of losing something than of gaining that very same thing. Anybody here from Santa Cruz? Anybody have connections to Santa Cruz? Okay, a few of you. There was a study done at the University of California at Santa Cruz. Researchers went door to door with a power official from PG&E who gave each homeowner an energy audit, told them how to put insulation, weather stripping in their homes to reduce the loss of energy. And half of these people were told, if you fully insulate your home, you will be able to save 50 cents a day. The other half were told, if you fail to fully implement these actions, you will lose 50 cents a day. Significantly more people insulated their homes under loss instructions than under gain instructions. The same thing, but couched in terms of loss, resonated more powerfully with people. People are more interested in information about what they stand to lose than what they stand to gain. And we are fools if we don't give them the information that they want. I saw a recent study that showed in making their projections for the future, managers weight information about losses, potential losses, more heavily than information about potential gains. We're fools if we don't tell people what they want and need to make their decisions. So, when you present your recommendations, it has to be as well in terms of the benefits they stand to gain and what they stand to lose, the unique benefits that they stand to lose if they don't move in your direction. Now, another thing about this principle of scarcity, it doesn't just work for commodities, it also works for information. Information that's exclusive, that not everyone has access to, turns out to be more persuasive. The best evidence I have for this actually comes from a study that was done by a student of mine, an unusual student, who had started a business in Arizona, a successful business, importing beef into the United States, right, and then selling it to large supermarket concerns. He came back to school to get his PhD, and I was sitting on his dissertation committee. He wanted to do a study using his own people, his own customers, his own salespeople, his own industry. And we began to talk about the research that showed that people are more attracted to scarce commodities and they are more persuaded by exclusive information. And he decided he would do the following study. He went to his salespeople who called their customers on the phone, told them about a certain allotment of beef that he said, and he said, now divide your customers into 3 groups and call them and tell them about this new allotment of beef we have available that we import from South America and Australia. They used their standard appeal, which was, we have a certain allotment of beef, we have such and such a price, such and such a quality, we can guarantee delivery by such and such a date. How many carloads of beef would you like? That was one group. A second group were called, and they were told, by the way, because of certain weather conditions in Australia, there's likely to be a shortage of Australian beef in the near future. How many carloads would you like? So he added scarcity to the mix for the second group. Let me show you what happened. Adding scarcity more than doubled the number of carloads of beef, from 10 to 24. But it was the third group that was most interesting. They were called on the phone. They were told about the allotment of beef. They were told about the scarcity, and then they were told, and this information comes to us from our exclusive sources in the Australian National Weather Service. No one else has this information. This was the scarcity double whammy, wasn't it? Not only was the beef scarce, the information that the beef was scarce. Let me show you what happened. 610% increase. It was the same beef. And this man came to me afterwards and said, you know, Dr. Cialdini, all of this was true. There was an impending shortage of Australian beef. This information did come to us through our exclusive sources in the Australian National Weather Service, and we never knew to use it before. Because he didn't know what the research says. Now you know what the research says. And here's the implication for you. When you get a new piece of information, an unpublished report comes across your desk, a new piece of information at a conference, or a piece of information from marketing research, and it supports what you are trying to argue with someone in terms of moving in a particular direction, your response should be to get on the phone, get on the facts, get in people's offices. That information is most powerful the newer it is. Information is not like wine. It does not get better with age. It's like bread. We want it more when it's fresh. We want to take it in more when it's warm rather than cold. Okay, let's move to the next principle of influence. Authority. If an expert says it, it must be true. We have a regrettable tendency for expert worship in this country. But here's what the research shows. The most powerful kind of expert authority is a credible authority who has both knowledge and trustworthiness. You need to tell people about your expertise and background before you try to influence them. They don't have a crystal ball. They can't tell that. Secondly, you have to establish your trustworthiness. Now, the difficult thing is establishing your trustworthiness in situations where they don't know you. They haven't worked with you. They don't have a history of knowing that you're a straight shooter. But if you are a trustworthy source of information, what can you do to tell them about it immediately. Well, here's the strategy that advertisers use successfully in this regard. Before they present their strongest arguments, they present a weakness in their case. They raise to the surface a drawback in what it is that they're suggesting, and then they say, however, our strongest points overwhelm that particular weakness. What that does is establish you both as a source of information, knowledgeable about the pros and the cons, and honest enough to bring the cons to the surface yourself before you present your strongest arguments. It's not what we typically do, but it's the right thing to do in terms of getting your arguments understood in the context of credibility, which makes your strongest arguments shine. Okay, next principle. It's the principle of consistency. Right? People are significantly more willing to say yes to a request that is consistent with what they have already said or done. Right? Let me give you an example. There's a problem that's been facing restaurant owners for a long time. No-shows. People who call on the phone, make a reservation for a table, and then don't appear. It's a big problem. There's a restaurateur in Chicago, Gordon Sinclair, who has solved this problem by adding 2 words to what his receptionist says. By using the principle of consistency, commitment and consistency, that people want to be consistent with what they have said publicly. Right? Here's what she used to say. Thank you for calling Gordon's Restaurant. Please call if you have to cancel your reservation. Now, what 2 words could she add to this that could significantly reduce the number of no-shows? Think about this in terms of the principle of commitment and consistency. What 2 words could get people to make a public commitment to call before they canceled their reservations? Anybody have an idea? Yes? Will you? Brilliant. Now she says, will you please call if you have to cancel your reservation? And no-shows have dropped from 30% to 10% immediately. 2 words, but they engage the power of a rule that people play by. So, one important thing for you to do is arrange for people not just to say yes to you verbally or to nod or to smile. Public commitment, and the most powerful form of public commitment is a written commitment. People live up to what they write down. Okay, next principle.
We're going to stop there. We're going to stop there with the video. I hope somebody, I don't know if people were paying attention or brushing their teeth or whatever you were doing, but I don't know what you're doing, but hopefully you saw a little bit of the video. What was there anything that you got out of the whole idea of what I said to you about go first? Yes, Nicholas.
What I got out of this was that you always got to like put your needs like put what they say in front of you, like also like in other words like if you like if you want to go, you go first and everything, like don't be the follower, always be the leader. Like let them listen to what they have to tell you.
I think that's true. Anybody else? Anybody else? So I think there's a lot there. Let me put you on show nothing there. Let's do this one. I don't know what happened. But I think there's a lot there. And why do I say there's a lot there is because if we look at what's happening, if you remember what he was saying, remember the whole idea about the cards, the Christmas cards. Why was that so impactful? Do you see why that was impactful? When they went first, they were able to change the dynamic of what was happening. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Right? It's really important to see that. Let me change the gallery. I like to do it that way. It's really important to see that. So when I was telling you to go first, and whatever happens to you happens through you, it's a key thing. For some people, some of the things we've learned, some of the things we've been looking at, you might wonder, I showed you Darian Brown and the whole idea of manipulating other people. But the first person that's manipulated in those situations is who? Yourself. So you want to come from a place that is coherent and makes sense to you and the person you're negotiating with. And the first person we negotiate with is ourselves. Is your hand up again, Nicholas?
Oh, yes. Also, like, he also points out the two words commitment and consistency. And he also, like, it also puts up to the tide, like, don't always just like say yes. Always got to make sure that you like learn what that person is. People got to live up to what they write down themselves, so they'll know how to do that in like public.
Well, that's what happens. So he's talking about public commitments. When you get people to commit by writing down, they tend to live up to it. But one of the key things he also says that a lot of people miss, and I've done this in other classes, in my happiness class, a student was a mother, young mother, was having trouble with the teacher who was not paying attention to her child. It's a 2-minute story. And she said, Professor, you say all these things. How can I influence this teacher? And I said, you know what you can do? I want you to go what? Second or first, do you think I said?
First.
Go first. And I said, you know what you do? I want you to go to Starbucks. And I want you to get a card, one of those gift cards of $10. And I want you to say all the good things in a little card to her that you're going to get. And so all the good things about her that you can think of, even though she's not doing everything for your son right now. And I want you to recognize, here's the thing. I know your face is, which is like, I love it. I love it. The face says, that's nuts, right? Maria's saying, what? That's nuts, right? I don't blame you. But as she said, okay, Professor, I'm going to do this. And her child was a special needs child who needed extra services. And the ending of the short story of this story was this. After we did this sort of law of reciprocity, go first, the teacher said, thank you, so-and-so. I am never thanked. I was working with your child and I knew that they needed extra services that I can't provide them with. But what I can do is I've written a special request form to the central office of the public school system, and your child is now going to get extra services that they would not have been entitled to. Yeah, that's how powerful it is. And he goes, what? I love it, because that's what we're thinking. What? Yeah, that's why I want you to see this video. I want you to look at this video again, and one person asked me to send just the video, which I will send the link to. But the real power of it is, this is the power of influence, because when you influence and you're coming from a good place, you touch the good seeds in the other person you are communicating with, so that they can feel their happiness and joy, and they want to be of help too. I don't know if you remember, we talked about the 6 human needs. Remember that?
Yes.
Certainty, right? I said the one you want to talk about here is, in this class, we talk about significance. And one of the other ones, what did that student touch in that teacher? Contribution. Right? Contribution, one of the aspirational goals. So by making that, enrolling this teacher in the vision of making that child a better student, a better human being, you enroll that teacher in that vision, and you change the entire destiny of your child. That's powerful. I'm not making that story up. That's real talk.
It's all facts.
Yeah, that's facts. She came back and she was like, Professor, this is scary. She said, this is scary. I said, it's not scary. It's human nature. And what happens is, remember, we talked about there's a difference between givers, takers, and matchers. Most of the time we want to be matchers because we want to be safe. We want to make sure the person commits to us at the same level. I'm telling you, use a different formula for your life, and your life will never be the same. Go first. Go first. Be an intelligent giver. Doesn't mean you go outside right now and say, I've got $100 in my pocket. Yeah, everybody take it. Everybody get $1. I'm not saying that. I'm saying being an intelligent giver. And that means being present with the people you're listening to, so that you can influence them so that their lives will be better. And so will your life be better. We're constantly negotiating. And the question becomes, what are the stories, going back to what we saw, what are the stories we're telling ourselves that tells us we don't have enough to give? That's a story. You're brilliant. You're intelligent, dynamic people. You're not in just anywhere, baby. You're in college. Right? Some of you are getting ready to graduate, or some of you close to being graduated. Who has convinced us, remember the stories, who has convinced us that we don't have what it takes to give? And therefore we have to hoard what we have, or we'll lose what we have. I want you to think differently about your life. I want you to think and know and find those areas of possibilities of giving so that you can build rapport where people can reciprocate, right? The law of reciprocity, that people can give you back something in exchange. Does that make sense to everybody?
Oh yeah.
All right. All right, everybody. We're out of here. We're getting down to the wire. I'm going to send out some more videos. In the interim time, I'm going to send this video out that you saw. We're going to come back to it because I want you to think about what you saw, because it's counterintuitive. It means it doesn't make sense. That's why I did the Ethiopia example, the example in Ethiopia of a country way before most of you were born, when I was alive. And I remember when that happened, and there was famine. Thousands of people were dying a day in Ethiopia. And when Mexico had its earthquake, they sent relief aid to Mexico. Why? Because Mexico, some 50 years earlier, when Ethiopia was trying to get its independence, had sent them aid. So it's not a matter of time. It's a matter of commitment and paying attention and listening to the people who are in your life. Does it make sense?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a beautiful day.
Stay safe, Professor.
Thank you. You too. Bye, everybody.